All right, so I just starting off with showing where Devil's Tower is. This is on the rain shadow side of the Rockies, so it's a very dry environment. And we go to it. There's the Devil's Tower. It's interesting. It's called Devil's Tower, but it was a misinterpretation of what the Native Americans actually were calling it. They called it more, most of the names they went by were bear something, bear's house, bear's lodge, bear's teepee, bear's lair, home of the bears. But when it wasn't that, it was something that represented kind of what it looked like. They called it a rock, a loft on a rock, tree rock, or associated with a horn, great gray horn, buffalo horn. So they recognized the association to that it was a rock or it was something very hard. And we're going to talk about that. But what all geologists that have studied it agree is that this rock, this huge rock, is a rock, and it's a igneous intrusion. It's a basalt formation. Here's a stump. It does look a lot like a stump, very similar to a stump. You can see this stump's been cut off. If you go back, that's pretty much the shape of that one. It's been cut off. But when trees are topped by some massive wind or storm or water, it's usually much more splintered. And this one on the bottom is actually from Mount St. Helens, a stump. And John, you showed an average person. This is an average person in America. Most tree stumps are, 1 foot, 2 foot when you cut them off, or a couple of feet when they're snapped off. Just to put it in perspective, that's a person climbing on Devil's Tower. That's average person is tiny compared. And so when you look at Devil's Tower, on the right here, I've got a picture of the current tallest tree in the world, which is a coastal redwood. It's 116 meters, whereas Devil's Tower is 264 meters. So Devil's Tower is 2.5 times the height of the tallest tree in the world currently. But it's interesting, is smaller than the giant tree that John showed, but even that giant tree is 1/2 the size of the Devil's Tower. And then you look at the base, and the base of Devil's Tower is 800 feet, whereas this tallest tree in the world is generally not nearly that wide. There are wider trees in the world alive today, but the tallest tree in the world is 15 feet wide. So nowhere close to the geometry. But the reason is because of these unique strata going up, these unique columns. It's called, columnar jointing that you see, and it makes it look like a tree. You can see these columns here, the rock columns of this hexagonal. They're not all hexagonal. Some of them are 4-sided, 5, 7, but they're huge, massive. Some of these, each individual one will be 20 feet wide, and they can be 600 feet tall, each column. And it's not alone. Not far from Devil's Tower, there are other buttes, the Missouri buttes. And you see these same formations all over the world. On the upper left, you see ones from Northern Ireland. We're going to show another picture of the Giant's Causeway. Here on the bottom is one from Sicily. You got in California, not that far away, Devil's Postpile. And these aren't nearly as large, but you see the same formation. So while it looks like it's unusual, it looks like it's shaped like a tree, these are found all over the world, these basalt formations with these columns, these hexagonal columns. You can see this one's in Turkey. Here's one in Paraguay. Oh, here's one in Australia. John may be talking about that. And so how are these formed? Well, the geologists proposed that these were formed 50 million years ago, that you had this igneous intrusion and that you had this rising up, this pressure of the magma. But the difference is these were formed underground is what they believed. And then they would push on up, and they would be surrounded in material, some type of sediment. But the geologists do not agree. They cannot explain. They'll all claim that they're 50 million years old, but they cannot agree on what formed Devil's Tower. They've put out several different theories on these, from this stock theory on down, but all of these show that it was covered in some type of material around it. That material's not here today. It's washed away. Well, there's some problems with that. These theories. One is that you don't see any of this pushing up of these layers around it as they are showing here. There's no evidence that any of this sediment has been bit. So how did it get up through there? Second, they say, well, this material was washed away by the Belle Fourche River. Okay, it's not the same Belle Fourche River as in Louisiana, where I'm familiar with, but from what I understand of it, that's not very large of a river, certainly not large enough to have any type of currents that could wash this sediment away. Then you have a problem with the fact that there's a debris pile around it, and you can classify how aged those are by the likings on them. And if this was 50 million years of erosion, this tower would no longer be there. It would be a pile of rubble. It'd be buried in its own blocks of rubble underneath. So it's a much better representation is the global flood, that these materials were formed underneath the sediment from the flood. But as the continents rose and the waters rushed off the continents, they removed these layers. And that's why these layers below are still lateral layers. This is a basalt I collected from not that far from here. You can see it's very porous. And here's a typical petrified. Yes, it's got this look at it of these lateral seams. You can see even the bark on it. But when you look at it, you see these broken off branches that John talked about. And you can cut it, and you can even see the inside, and you can even see growth rings. You don't see any of that in these materials, so it's clearly not petrified wood. It just has a shape that's similar, columnar type shape. So again, it's good evidence of the flood, that this pushed up through while there were fresh sediments that were soft, and then those sediments washed away as the floodwaters came off of the continents.